Former Iranian diplomat Mehrdad Khonsari, who joins us now from London. Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for waiting. We do apologize, but sort of enlighten this for me, because these sanctions that were put on Iran were mainly targeting Iran's critical sectors, whether it be energy, whether it be financial and banking service. Are you surprised that according to this Human Rights Watch group report, that it's having sort of a spillover effect in a completely unintended sector, and that is human healthcare and medical services?
I believe that the Human Rights Watch report is a much delayed report because talk of this nature, in other words, the inability for Iran to be able to serve its medical needs, issues that are not part of the American sanctions, have been mentioned and discussed, but nothing really big made out of it over the last several months. So I think that they have pointed to a very critical issue where people are unable, because of secondary sanctions, as you mentioned, to have access to medicines in many hospitals, the equipment, spare parts. All of these things have become affected in quite an unintended way, although this has been mentioned many times, and American authorities have constantly said that that their sanctions are not intended to prevent Iranian access to these things, yet they have made no assistance in trying to create a way whereby banks and transactions for the acquisition of these basic necessities are accommodated.
All right, I want to sort of want to get your take on this, because just a couple of days after Human Rights Watch published this report, Washington basically came out and specifically named Iran as a, quote, jurisdiction of primary money laundering under the U.S. Patriot Act. Basically, what's going to happen is that, we briefly talked about it, that companies are going to sort of go through this extra or special due diligence in their efforts, or rather affairs with Iranian entities. What is behind this? Does America sort of want an in on the Iranian banking system, or does it want to expose perhaps maybe other countries like European companies that are sort of exposed to the Iranian market?
Well, I think, I mean, the basic aim of the American government through the imposition of maximum sanctions is to try to bring the Iranian government to its knees so that it can acquiesce to the kind of political demands that they're making. But in doing that, and of course what you just mentioned is another aspect of that overall strategy, but in all this time what they have been saying is that food or medicine that goes or must make its way to ordinary Iranians is not part of their intended action. Yet what is happening is that as a consequence of the way that they have put all these things together, ordinary Iranians are suffering. And as a consequence, this maximum pressure policy, which is supposed to encourage Iranians to rise against the tyranny of their government, is having a completely reverse effect, in the sense that they are being victimized by due to lack of proper administration of the very things that they are trying to do. So it's having a reverse effect, and at the same time exposing millions of people to unnecessary and unintended harm.
I want to ask you about that. I mean, you're saying that the ordinary Iranians are suffering. Like you mentioned, the United States seems very determined in continuing with this maximum pressure campaign. How long can the Iranian people resist, put up with this?
Well, you see, the point is that it's very difficult to say how long they can resist. The fact is that the Iranian people have no choice. the people who make the decisions in Iran are the Iranian government. The Iranian government does not wish to acquiesce to the kind of demands that the United States is doing and will resist these pressures. You have to bear in mind that in a similar case, in the case of, let's say, Saddam Hussein, he did not acquiesce to the pressures imposed on him by the sanctions. And there were reports that prior to the 2003 invasion, that some 500,000 young Iraqis, children and so on, had lost their lives. So the point is that the suffering is going on if the mechanism, in other words, in Iraq, when the sanctions were in place, there was a mechanism whereby food for oil or medicine for oil was possible. Now, as a result of what has been sort of imposed on Iran as a part of this maximum pressure campaign, those items are facing difficulties in getting to their destination. In other words, Iranian people who are not supposed to be suffering from lack of medicine or lack of foodstuff are simply incapable of having access to it, because the banking facilities, in order to allow for the government to pay for these, is being hampered by the kind of difficulties that the Treasury in the United States is imposing.
Okay.
So the Europeans tried to do something about this, but they have not done anything about it. So as a result, this problem is continuing and the suffering is continuing.
Okay. Ambassador Mehrdad Khonsari, thank you very much for joining us here on the NewsHour. I do appreciate your analysis.